It was a bright summer morning in London. The sky was clear and the crowd outside the royal palace was full of excitement. Visitors from all around the world had come to see the royal guards. Everyone knew about them. The brave men in red uniforms and tall black hats who stood perfectly still no matter what happened around them. They were known for their discipline and silence. People respected them because they represented centuries of royal tradition. Cameras clicked everywhere, children waved small flags, and tourists smiled as they took photos from a safe distance. Among the crowd that day was a man named Luke. He had come from America with a small travel group. He loved taking videos for social media and wanted something dramatic to post online. He was loud, confident, and thought everything was just for fun. He didn't believe there was anything serious about the guards who stood like statues in front of the palace gates. As he watched them, a mischievous idea started to form in his mind. He thought it would be funny to make one of the guards move. His friends laughed when he said that, but they didn't think he would actually try. Luke moved closer to the front of the crowd. He looked at one of the guards who was standing at his post near the gate. The guard's name was Thomas. He was young but carried himself with the strength and pride of a soldier. His face was calm, his eyes fixed straight ahead, and he did not move even when the crowd around him became noisy. His uniform was spotless, his boots polished, and his tall bearskin hat made him look even taller and more serious. Every minute, the other guard on the opposite side marched a few steps, turned, and came back in perfect rhythm. It was a sight of order and discipline that impressed most tourists. But Luke saw it as a challenge. He began talking loudly to his friends, saying things like, "Do they even blink? Or are they real people or robots?" The people near him frowned and told him to be quiet, but he laughed. His voice carried through the crowd, making people turn their heads. Some tourists shook their heads and moved away, not wanting to be near him. But Luke enjoyed the attention. He raised his phone, started recording, and shouted toward the guard, trying to get a reaction. The guard didn't move, didn't look, didn't even blink. That only made Luke want to push more. He started joking with the crowd, asking if anyone had ever seen a guard smile. A few people tried to ignore him, but his loud voice made it hard. One older woman told him to respect the guard, but he waved his hand carelessly. "They're not doing anything," he said. "Just standing there like statues." His friends laughed nervously, knowing he was going too far. But Luke wasn't listening to reason anymore. He was thinking only about how many views his video would get if he made a guard break his serious face. He believed it would be a great story to tell when he returned home. The longer he stood there, the more restless he became. He stepped past the rope barrier that separated the visitors from the guards. The crowd gasped. A security officer nearby called out, "Sir, please step back." But Luke only grinned and took one more step closer. He wanted to see how close he could get before someone stopped him. The guard remained still, holding his rifle across his chest, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Luke waved his hand in front of the guard's face as if testing if he would blink. The guard did not move. Some people started recording with their phones while others murmured in disbelief. The atmosphere turned tense. Even Luke's friends began to look uncomfortable. One little boy standing with his parents asked softly, "Why is that man doing that?" His father replied, "Because he doesn't understand what respect means." Those words went unnoticed by Luke, who was too focused on his phone. He circled around the guard slowly, acting as if it was all part of a game. The tourists' smiles had faded now. They could feel that something wrong was about to happen. The guards were known to stay still unless someone crossed the line, but Luke was right on that edge. Thomas, the guard, felt the man's presence close to him. He was trained not to react unless absolutely necessary. His mind stayed calm, his breathing steady. He had faced loud tourists before, but this one felt different, more careless, more arrogant. Still, he followed his duty. His silence was his strength and his calm was his pride. He kept reminding himself that he wore the uniform not just for himself but for his country, his unit, and the history he represented. Meanwhile, Luke turned to the crowd and shouted, "He's not going to do anything, look!" Some people tried to warn him again, telling him to stop before he got into trouble. But he laughed louder, trying to draw more attention. He took one last step forward, close enough to see the guard's polished buttons shining in the sunlight. The air felt heavy now. Everyone was watching. A few whispered, "He's going to regret this." Luke stood there for a moment, expecting the guard to blink or react. When nothing happened, he became frustrated. He leaned slightly and said under his breath, "Come on, move." Still nothing. His pride was now challenged. In that moment, he forgot about rules, respect, and even his safety. He was focused only on proving his own point. Slowly, he raised his foot as if teasing and lightly tapped the guard's leg. Not hard, but enough to cross the line completely. The sound was small, but the reaction was instant. The guard took one powerful step forward, his voice strong and deep as he shouted, "Step back!" The sudden command echoed sharply through the courtyard. The crowd jumped in surprise. Luke stumbled backward, startled by the unexpected movement and the loud voice. His foot slipped on the uneven stone path, and before he could regain his balance, he fell backward. His phone flew out of his hand, hitting the ground beside him. The laughter stopped immediately. The crowd gasped, and the area fell silent. For a few seconds, Luke sat on the ground in shock. His ankle throbbed in pain, and he realized he had twisted it badly. His friends ran to him, asking if he was okay. He tried to stand, but the pain was too sharp. The same crowd that had watched him mock the guard now looked at him with disappointment. No one laughed anymore. The guard returned to his position, face forward, motionless once again as if nothing had happened. His calm presence now seemed more powerful than ever. A tourist nearby whispered, "He warned him." Another said quietly, "He got what he deserved." Luke heard those words and felt his face burn with shame. The guard did not look at him again. His job was done, his order restored. The crowd slowly began to move away, but the story of that moment stayed in everyone's mind. What had started as a joke had turned into a painful lesson about respect, pride, and the difference between mockery and honor. As the security officers came to help Luke, the echo of the guard's voice still rang in his head. For the first time, he realized that the silence of those guards was not weakness. It was strength. It was a kind of discipline that he had never understood before. Sitting there on the cold stones, clutching his ankle, he finally saw what everyone else had seen all along, that those who stand in silence sometimes carry the greatest power of all. The crowd around the palace was silent after the sudden fall. The laughter and chatter that once filled the air had vanished. People stared at Luke, who was still sitting on the ground holding his ankle with a pained expression. His phone lay a few feet away, its screen cracked. His friends looked shocked and unsure what to do. They had told him to stop, but he hadn't listened. Now the man who had been laughing a few moments ago sat quietly, grimacing in pain and confusion. His pride had disappeared, replaced by regret. A few tourists stepped closer, asking if he was all right. One woman said softly, "You should not have done that." Another man shook his head, muttering, "He learned the hard way." No one laughed anymore. The atmosphere felt heavy, and everyone understood that something serious had happened, even though no one had been hurt badly. The guard who had shouted the command was already back in his position, standing tall and silent once again. His face was calm, his eyes fixed straight ahead as if the entire incident never happened. His discipline amazed everyone who saw him. Luke tried to stand, but as soon as he put weight on his leg, pain shot through his ankle. He groaned quietly and sat back down. His friends helped him up and tried to check if he could walk, but his ankle had already started to swell. One of them said, "You might have twisted it." "Don't move!" Luke didn't answer. His earlier confidence had turned into embarrassment. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him. People were whispering, taking photos, and recording the scene. But this time it wasn't for fun. It was a warning. A palace security officer quickly came over. He was calm but firm as he spoke. "Sir, are you injured? Please remain still. We'll call for assistance." Luke nodded, too ashamed to say much. The officer asked him a few questions to make sure he was okay. Another officer joined and began moving the crowd back to give them space. Luke could see the guard still standing just a few feet away, not reacting, not even glancing at him. It made him feel even worse. He finally realized that the man he had tried to mock had never lost his composure, even for a second. A medical team arrived within minutes with a small first aid kit. They checked Luke's ankle carefully. The medic said gently, "It looks like a sprain. You'll need to rest it. It's not broken, but you shouldn't walk for a while." Luke nodded silently. He wanted to disappear. The crowd was still watching, and he felt every pair of eyes judging him. He had wanted to make a funny video, but now he had become the example of what not to do. His face turned red as he avoided eye contact with everyone. The palace staff guided Luke to a nearby bench where he could sit comfortably while they finished checking his leg. His friends followed, carrying his broken phone. They were quiet, too embarrassed to say much. One of them whispered, "You shouldn't have done that, man. They're serious about those guards." Luke didn't reply. His mind was spinning. The scene replayed in his head over and over. How he had laughed, stepped forward, touched the guard, and then suddenly everything changed. He had thought he was in control, but he realized now he never was. As he sat on the bench, he looked up at the palace gate again. The guard was still there, unmoved. The same strong stance, the same quiet dignity. Tourists had returned to watching from a respectful distance again, as if nothing had happened. But for Luke, the moment had changed everything. He now saw the guard not as a statue, but as a man of honor doing his duty with silent strength. He couldn't believe he had been foolish enough to treat him like an object. Every second he sat there, guilt grew heavier in his chest. A few children passed by, holding their parents' hands. One little girl pointed to the guard and said, "Mommy, he's so brave. He didn't even move when that man fell." Her mother nodded softly, replying, "That's discipline. That's what respect looks like." Luke overheard those words. They stung, but they also made him think deeply. He remembered how people back home often made fun of things they didn't understand. He had done the same, laughing at something serious just because it looked strange to him. Now he finally understood why others had told him to respect the guards. They weren't just standing there for show. They were symbols of patience and service. The pain in his ankle was sharp, but the pain in his heart was worse. He thought about how the guard must have felt, being mocked while doing his duty, being provoked by someone who didn't understand what that job meant. Yet the guard hadn't reacted with anger. He had stayed calm, only speaking when necessary, only moving when it was time. Luke realized that was what true strength looked like. Not loudness, not pride, but calm control. As time passed, the crowd changed. New tourists arrived, not knowing what had happened earlier. Luke watched them smile, take photos, and laugh in happiness. He wished he could turn back time and be one of them again. Just a regular visitor enjoying the moment instead of ruining it. But he couldn't. He had already learned his lesson in a painful way. The officers returned and told him he could leave after resting for a while. They offered to call a taxi to take him back to his hotel. He thanked them quietly. Before leaving, Luke turned one last time toward the guard. He wanted to say something, maybe even apologize, but he didn't know if it was allowed. The guard's face remained expressionless, his posture perfect. The distance between them felt huge now, not just physically, but in meaning. One man was learning humility, while the other stood as an example of it. Luke lowered his head and whispered to himself, "I'm sorry." It was quiet, but it came from the heart. When the taxi arrived, Luke limped slowly toward it with his friend's help. His ankle hurt with every step, but his mind was filled with thoughts of what had happened. As he sat in the back seat, he looked out the window and saw the palace fading into the distance. The crowd outside looked small now, but the image of the guard remained clear in his memory, tall, silent, unshaken. It was an image that he knew would stay with him forever. Back at his hotel, Luke rested on his bed, his foot wrapped in a bandage. His friends tried to cheer him up, saying it was just bad luck, but he didn't see it that way. He knew it was his own fault. He thought about deleting the video he had recorded, but part of him knew it might serve a purpose. It could remind others not to make the same mistake he did. For the first time that day, he felt something different. Respect. Not just for the guard, but for anyone who carried their duty with quiet honor. That night, as he sat by the window, the city lights reflected in his eyes. He could still hear the guard's voice in his head, calm, powerful, and full of command. Just one line had changed his entire view of respect. He understood now that silence doesn't mean weakness and calm doesn't mean fear. It means control, balance, and strength. He promised himself that if he ever got the chance, he would apologize properly to the guard who had unknowingly taught him that lesson. Luke didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about how close he came to hurting someone's pride just for his own entertainment. It was something he couldn't forget. The next day, when he looked at the palace from afar, he no longer saw guards. He saw protectors. Men who stood in the sun and the rain without complaint, carrying their duty with dignity. He whispered quietly. They deserve more respect than any of us can imagine. That day changed him forever. The man who once laughed at discipline now admired it. The man who thought silence was weakness now understood that it was strength. He had gone there to film a joke, but ended up learning a lesson that no video could ever teach. The fall had hurt his ankle, but it had healed something deeper, his understanding of humility. The next morning, London was cloudy, and a soft drizzle covered the streets. Luke woke up in his hotel room with a dull pain in his ankle. His foot was still swollen, wrapped carefully in a bandage. As he sat up, the events of the previous day replayed in his mind like a movie. Every detail came back to him. The laughter, the guard's warning voice, and the sharp pain that followed. But what stayed strongest in his heart was not the fall. It was the calm, composed face of the guard who had never lost his discipline even for a second. Luke could not stop thinking about it. He felt embarrassed. He had traveled halfway across the world only to behave foolishly in front of hundreds of people. He checked his phone again. The cracked screen still worked. When he opened the gallery, he found the video he had recorded. It showed his loud voice, his teasing words, and then the moment he fell. He watched it silently. The more he watched, the worse he felt. It wasn't funny anymore. It was painful to see how arrogant he looked. His friends had told him to stop, and strangers had warned him, but he had ignored everyone. Now, seeing it from outside, he realized how childish and disrespectful his behavior had been. Luke sat quietly for a long time. His friends knocked on his door and came inside to check on him. They asked how he was feeling. He said his ankle hurt, but what hurt more was his pride. One of his friends, Adam, said gently, "You should forget it. It was a mistake." But Luke shook his head. "No," he said softly. "It wasn't just a mistake. It was disrespect." His tone was serious now. He knew that the guard had not done anything wrong. It was he who had crossed the line. That realization changed something inside him. Later that afternoon, he decided to go out for a short walk, even though it was hard with his ankle. He wanted to visit the palace again. His friends thought it was a bad idea, but he insisted. He said, "I just need to see it one more time." They agreed to come along, helping him walk slowly with a small crutch borrowed from the hotel staff. The sky was gray, and the wet streets reflected the soft light of the palace when they arrived. The crowd was smaller this time because of the rain. But the guards were there, still standing firm, still motionless, still guarding the same gates with the same dignity. Luke stopped a few meters away. He didn't step close this time. He stood quietly, just watching. He could see the guards changing position every few minutes, their movements sharp and perfectly timed. Every step they took seemed to carry meaning. Every turn was full of discipline. He admired the way they worked. No hesitation, no complaint, no distraction. Just duty. Watching them, he felt a sense of respect he had never felt before. For the first time, he saw beyond the uniform and realized that every one of them was a real person who trained for years to stand there proudly. Rain or shine, the same guard from yesterday, Thomas, was there again. Luke recognized him immediately. The tall figure, the calm face, the strong posture. He looked exactly the same as before, unaffected by what had happened. That made Luke respect him even more. He wanted to go near and say sorry, but he didn't want to disturb him again. So he just stood quietly under the light rain, his crutch in one hand, his heart heavy but humble. People walked by and some of them noticed him. A few even whispered, recognizing him from yesterday's scene, but he didn't care. He was there to face his mistake, even if it was in silence. As he stood there, Luke began to think about the meaning of respect. He realized that sometimes people don't understand the value of things until they lose their dignity in front of them. The guards weren't there for fun or pictures. They were there for tradition, for honor, for something far greater than tourists could imagine. He had thought they were lifeless, but now he could see the strength in their stillness. He thought about Thomas standing there for hours, not reacting to the rain or the crowd. It wasn't easy. It was willpower. It was dedication. The drizzle turned into a gentle rain. Luke's friend suggested leaving, but he said softly, "Just a few more minutes." He wanted to stay long enough to understand fully what he had done. As he looked around, he noticed the people behaving differently than he had before. They were keeping their distance, speaking softly, and taking respectful photos. No one was shouting or teasing. He saw a young couple quietly holding hands, smiling at the guard from afar. A child waved politely, and the mother reminded him not to cross the rope. Everyone seemed to understand something he had missed that day. Respect is silent, not loud. Suddenly, a small group of tourists near him began talking about the incident from yesterday. They didn't know Luke was standing right beside them. One man said, "Did you hear about that tourist who kicked the guard yesterday? He hurt his leg. People said he was embarrassed." Another replied, "Serves him right. You don't mess with soldiers like that." Luke heard every word. His face turned red again, but he didn't move. He didn't blame them. They were right. He had earned their criticism. But inside him, he wasn't angry anymore.
He accepted it because he knew he deserved it.
And accepting it made him feel a little lighter. After a while, the guards began their routine change. Luke watched Thomas step forward with precise timing, his boots clicking on the wet stone. The sound echoed in the courtyard. It was powerful but peaceful. Luke's eyes followed every movement. It was like a rhythm of respect, discipline, and honor. When Thomas turned for a brief moment, his gaze passed over Luke, not with anger, not even with recognition, but with calm professionalism. That small glance was enough for Luke. It told him that the guard had moved on, and now so could he. When it was time to leave, Luke took one last look at the palace. He said quietly to himself, "I will remember this day for the rest of my life." As they walked back to the car, his friends noticed that he looked different, calmer, more thoughtful. He wasn't talking about videos or views anymore. He was quiet, lost in reflection. The experience had changed him deeply. That evening, back in his hotel room, Luke couldn't stop thinking about everything he had seen. He opened his laptop and started typing. He wanted to write about the experience, not as an excuse, but as a confession. He wrote about his mistake, his fall, and how the guard's calmness had taught him something about true strength. He wrote about how silence could be powerful, how discipline could be beautiful, and how respect was something everyone should give freely. The words came slowly at first, but then they flowed from his heart. It wasn't just a story. It was his lesson written down for others to learn from. When he finished, he looked at the video on his phone one last time. Instead of deleting it, he decided to keep it, not to post for fun, but as a reminder of what he had learned. The crack on his phone screen became a symbol to him, a small scar that would remind him to think before he acted. He looked out the window again and saw the city lights glowing against the night sky. Somewhere out there, the guards were still standing, still watching, still doing their duty in the cold. He whispered to himself, "They're stronger than I ever realized." Before sleeping, Luke made a quiet promise. If he ever met that guard again, he would thank him, not just for his patience, but for showing him what real strength and respect looked like. He knew he could never undo what he had done, but he could change the kind of person he was from that day forward. That thought brought him peace. As the rain continued outside, Luke finally lay down. His eyes slowly closed, but his heart was awake, filled with humility. He understood that life sometimes teaches lessons in unexpected ways, through mistakes, through silence, and through the strength of those who never lose their calm. He had gone to the palace as a tourist, but he was leaving as someone wiser. The day had changed him completely. The next day began with a pale morning sky. The city was waking up slowly, and the air carried the soft sound of traffic and footsteps. Luke sat near the window of his hotel room, sipping tea while staring outside. His ankle still hurt, but his thoughts were far from the pain. His mind was full of the image of the royal guard Thomas standing in silence, serving with pride and strength. That image had stayed with him through the night. It wasn't just the guard's calm that touched him. It was his patience and kindness in the face of disrespect. Luke wanted to say something, to apologize properly, but he didn't know how. He kept wondering if the guard would even remember him. Maybe to Thomas he was just another face in the crowd, another moment of disturbance in his long hours of duty. But to Luke, that guard had become the reason he saw respect differently. By noon, Luke decided to go back to the palace once again. His friends were surprised. "You're still thinking about yesterday?" Adam asked. Luke smiled slightly. "Yes," he replied. "I want to say sorry even if he doesn't hear it." He spoke with honesty this time, and his voice carried none of the arrogance it once had. His friends could see the change in him, so they helped him get ready and called a taxi. The ride was quiet. Luke looked out the window as they passed the busy streets. the tall buildings and the people walking with umbrellas under the gray sky. Everything felt different to him now, not quieter, calmer. Maybe it wasn't the city that had changed, but him. When they arrived near the palace, the place looked the same as before, yet it felt different to Luke. He walked carefully with his crutch and stopped a safe distance from the gate. The crowd was larger that day since the rain had stopped. Tourists were smiling, taking photos, and enjoying the view. The guards stood tall and proud as usual. Luke searched with his eyes and soon recognized Thomas again. The same tall figure in red uniform, the same polished boots, the same perfect stillness. Luke's heart felt heavy but also grateful. He didn't want to repeat his mistake. This time he just wanted to watch with respect. For several minutes Luke stood quietly, observing how Thomas and his fellow guard worked together with perfect timing. Every step, every turn, every command was filled with purpose. There was no need for words. Their movements spoke of discipline, patience, and pride. Luke felt like he was watching something sacred, something people often took for granted. The more he watched, the more he admired the dedication behind their silence. After a while, Luke noticed the crowd shifting. The guards were about to change duty. It was time for a new pair to take their place. Luke's heart began to beat faster. He realized that if he wanted to speak to Thomas, this was his only chance. As soon as the change ended and the crowd started to move again, Luke waited near the path where the off-duty guards usually walked away. When Thomas finally stepped out, Luke gathered his courage and called out softly, "Sir." His voice was quiet but sincere. Thomas turned slightly, his eyes calm and steady. He recognized the face instantly. The man who had caused trouble a few days ago now stood before him with an entirely different expression. Humble, regretful, and full of respect. Luke swallowed hard and said, "I wanted to say sorry." His voice shook slightly. "What I did was wrong. I didn't understand the meaning of your duty. I made fun of something I should have respected. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry." The crowd nearby grew silent for a moment, sensing the seriousness of his tone. Thomas looked at him carefully. His face didn't show anger or pride. It showed calm understanding. For a brief moment he simply stood there, as if deciding what to say. Then in a soft but firm voice he replied, "We serve to protect, not to entertain." The words hit Luke deeply. He felt tears rise in his eyes, not from sadness but from realization. Those simple words carried a meaning far stronger than any lecture could. Thomas didn't scold him. He didn't speak harshly. He just reminded him of what duty truly meant. Luke nodded slowly and said, "I understand now." His voice was quiet but full of emotion. Thomas gave him a small nod, not a smile, not a gesture of forgiveness, but a sign that he had heard the apology. Then he turned and continued walking toward the inner courtyard, his steps as steady as ever. Luke stood there watching him go. That short exchange felt like the most important moment of his trip. His friends were silent too, knowing it meant something big to him. For the first time in his life, Luke felt what true respect was. Not demanded, not forced, but earned through humility. The air felt lighter now, as if a weight had lifted from his heart. He whispered to himself, "I'll never forget this." He knew he had been given a second chance, well, not by words, but by the quiet grace of someone who understood duty better than anyone. As they left the palace area, Luke's friends noticed how peaceful he looked. He wasn't the same loud tourist who had mocked the guards days ago. He was quieter, more thoughtful. That night back at the hotel, he couldn't stop thinking about Thomas's words. "We serve to protect, not to entertain." Those words echoed in his mind over and over. He realized that they didn't just apply to soldiers or guards. They applied to everyone who took their work seriously, who stood firm in what they believed in, even when people didn't understand them. Luke sat at his desk and opened his laptop again. This time he began writing not just for himself but for others. He wanted people to know the truth behind what had happened. He started with the title, "A Lesson from a Royal Guard." In simple words, he wrote how he had arrived in London full of pride, how he had disrespected something he didn't understand, and how that moment of shame had taught him one of the most valuable lessons of his life. He wrote about the guard's discipline, his calm strength, and his kindness. He wrote about how one short sentence changed his heart, and as he wrote, he felt peace growing inside him. When he finished, he read his story out loud. It was honest, humble, and full of gratitude. His friends listened quietly, and one of them said, "You should share this with others." Luke wasn't sure at first. He didn't want attention or sympathy. But he realized that maybe his mistake could help others understand respect before making the same error. So after thinking for a while, he uploaded the story online with a simple note. Sometimes life teaches us through silence. Within hours, people began to read it. The story spread quickly because it was real, simple, and meaningful. Readers from around the world commented with messages like, "This made me think," and "Respect to all who serve." Some even shared their own stories of learning respect in unexpected ways. Luke didn't expect it to reach so many people. He wasn't proud of what he had done, but he was proud that he had learned and changed. That evening, he sat on the balcony of his hotel, watching the sunset behind the city's skyline. The golden light touched the palace roofs far in the distance. He smiled softly, thinking of Thomas standing there again, firm and quiet as always. He whispered, "Thank you." He knew the guard would probably never read his story, but the lesson would stay with him forever. The world sometimes teaches lessons through words, but this one had been taught through silence, strength, and grace. As night came, Luke closed his eyes, feeling calm. He had come to London as a tourist chasing photos and videos, but he was leaving with something much greater: wisdom. He had learned that respect isn't demanded through fear or power. It grows through understanding and humility, and he promised himself that wherever he went next, he would carry that respect in his heart. The next morning, before leaving for the airport, he looked at the palace one last time through the window of his taxi. He didn't see it as a place of guards anymore. He saw it as a place where he found a part of himself he didn't know was missing, the part that understood the beauty of discipline and the strength of quiet honor. The next morning, the sky was gray, and a light drizzle fell over the streets of London. Mark woke up in his hotel room, his ankle wrapped in bandages. Every time he tried to move, he felt a dull ache. The sound of the palace guard's march echoed faintly through the city, reminding him of the place where everything had happened. He looked at his phone screen, cracked from the fall, and saw the half-recorded video his friends had taken. For a moment, he thought about deleting it, but instead he watched it quietly. He saw himself laughing, mocking, and then falling. The sound of the guard's command still echoed clearly. It made him feel small inside. Shame replaced the pride he had felt that day. Mark sat by the window watching people walk by with umbrellas. He remembered how confident he had been when he arrived, how he thought rules were just suggestions. But now he realized that those guards were not just men in fancy uniforms. They were people doing their duty with honor and calm no matter how others behaved. The thought made him feel guilty. He remembered the officer who had spoken kindly to him after the fall and how he hadn't shouted or insulted him, even when Mark clearly deserved it. That kindness was what hurt the most. It reminded him that sometimes dignity speaks louder than anger. By late morning, Mark decided he wanted to go back to the palace. His friends were unsure. They thought it would be embarrassing, but Mark said he needed to do it. So with a small crutch under his arm and a quiet heart, he made his way through the busy streets again. When he reached the palace gates, he stopped for a moment. The crowd was large again, with tourists holding cameras and children sitting on their parents' shoulders. The guards stood in their usual positions, tall, still, and strong. Their red coats and black hats looked brighter against the gray sky. Mark felt a strange calm as he stood there, hidden among the people. He didn't want anyone to recognize him, and luckily, no one did. He looked at the guard standing nearest to him. He wasn't sure if it was the same one from yesterday, but it didn't matter. All he felt was respect. He slowly took out his phone and took one single photo. No laughter, no jokes, just quiet admiration. As he did, a little boy standing next to him whispered to his mother, asking why the guards never moved. The mother smiled and said softly, "Because they serve with discipline and pride. They protect even in silence." Mark smiled a little when he heard that. It was such a simple explanation, yet it said everything he had learned in one short sentence. As the changing of the guard began, Mark watched the precision of every movement. The rhythm of their boots on the stone echoed through the courtyard. Every turn, every step was perfect. He realized how much practice, focus, and patience it must take to perform that duty every single day, no matter the weather or the crowd. He thought of how he had mocked that discipline, and now it amazed him. His respect grew deeper with every passing second. He even whispered quietly, "Thank you," though no one could hear him over the sound of the drums. but he meant it from his heart. When the ceremony ended, the crowd started to move away. Mark stayed for a while longer, leaning on his crutch, just looking at the palace gates. Then he saw a familiar face. It was the same officer who had helped him the previous day. The officer recognized him too and gave a small nod. For a moment, Mark felt nervous, unsure of what to say. But the officer walked over slowly and asked how he was doing. Mark replied softly, "I'm healing, sir, and I wanted to say thank you for everything." The officer gave a gentle smile and said, "You're welcome. Just remember, respect doesn't make you small. It makes you strong." Those words felt heavy but comforting. Mark nodded and promised he would never forget them. Later that evening, back in his hotel room, Mark opened his social media app. He had thought about what had happened over and over again, and he decided it was time to share it, not as a joke, but as an honest story. He began typing slowly, describing the moment he arrived at the palace, how he made fun of the guards, how he ignored warnings, and how his own foolishness caused his pain. He didn't try to make excuses. He admitted he was wrong. He wrote about how the guard stayed calm and never lost his composure, and how the officer treated him with patience instead of anger. He ended the post with the words, "I went to see a guard, but I met a lesson. Respect is not a rule. It's a mirror that shows who we really are." He uploaded a picture of the guard he had taken that morning, the one where he stood silently in the rain. The post was short but honest. Mark didn't expect anyone to care, but within hours people began commenting. Some thanked him for sharing. Others said they had seen similar moments at the palace, and a few admitted they too had once thought the guards were only for show. The post began to spread quickly. Travel pages shared it, calling it a lesson from London. People admired how the royal guard kept his composure, and how a moment of arrogance turned into a story of humility. The next morning, Mark woke up to hundreds of messages. Some people said his story made them tear up. Others said it reminded them to be kinder to workers, officers, and anyone who serves quietly. A few even wrote that they planned to visit the palace with more respect. Mark smiled as he read the comments. He didn't feel proud in the old way, he felt peaceful. He realized that sharing truth could do more good than pretending to be perfect. A few days later, before leaving London, Mark visited the palace one last time. This time he stood far from the crowd, watching silently as the guards began their shift. The sun had come out again and everything looked brighter. He whispered softly, "Thank you for teaching me." Then he turned and walked away, feeling lighter than before. The sound of the marching guards faded behind him, but their presence stayed in his heart. When he boarded his flight home, Mark looked out of the window and thought about how one mistake had changed him. He didn't just remember the pain in his ankle or the embarrassment of falling. He remembered the calm face of the guard, the steady voice of the officer, and the quiet dignity that spoke louder than any words. He promised himself that from that day on, he would treat people with respect, especially those who served without asking for applause. Back home, whenever someone mentioned his trip, he told them about the guard. Not the fall, not the kick, but the lesson. Some of his friends laughed, thinking he exaggerated, but others listened quietly, realizing how much he had changed. And sometimes when he walked past a police officer, a soldier, or even a security guard standing under the sun, he would smile and nod with quiet respect, because deep down he knew one thing that no camera could ever capture. That day in London had taught him what true honor looked like.